I'm Dorothy Langston, 70 years old this fall, recently retired, though I still struggle with what that word is supposed to mean for someone like me. For 4 decades, I built a media company from the ground up. Started in my basement with a borrowed fax machine and a phone that barely worked when it rained. Last month, I signed the final sale papers, $88 million. That was the number on the check. People clapped when they heard the news, friends and strangers alike. But behind the smiles, I could feel something else. Envy? Maybe. Or maybe just disbelief that an old woman could still close a deal like that. Either way, I decided to host a small retirement gathering at my home, something elegant and quiet. Just family, some trusted colleagues, a few longtime neighbors. Nothing flashy. That afternoon, the garden had never looked better. The catering team Evan insisted on hiring set everything up. White linen tables, champagne on ice, string quartet softly playing near the hydrangeas. Evan is my son-in-law, charming, well-dressed, always selling something. He married my daughter Elaine 10 years ago. She says he's the best thing that ever happened to her. I've kept my opinion to myself. The toast was scheduled for 6 o'clock. I stood near the fountain, holding the microphone, smiling at familiar faces as I recounted the early days of building Langston Media. I remember saying something about risk and grit and the smell of toner in the morning. People laughed in the right places, nodded in others. But I wasn't really focused on them. I was watching Evan. He stood near the drinks table, his back to most of the crowd, fiddling with a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses. I know that wine. I'd chosen it myself, a Syrah from Sonoma, one of my favorites. What caught my eye was the way Evan glanced around, not nervous, calculating. He pulled a small object from his jacket pocket, something no bigger than a thimble, and poured its contents into one of the glasses. My heart didn't race, not yet, but something settled heavily in my chest. Not panic, recognition. I'd seen that kind of choreography before. Years in media taught me to watch hands, not words. Evan turned, wine glasses in hand, his face composed like a man making a gracious gesture. He walked straight toward me. "Dorothy," he said, smiling, "you've earned this. Let me be the one to pour." He handed me the glass, the one on the left. I took it without flinching. Behind me, guests were raising their own glasses. Cameras flashed. My daughter stood beside Evan, glowing with the pride of a woman who thought she'd married well. I didn't drink. Not yet. As he stepped back into the crowd, I turned slowly and walked toward the patio, my fingers tightening around the stem of the wine glass. Evan's father, Richard, retired judge, proud of his son's ambition, stood near the garden arch, chatting with a colleague of mine from the network. I passed him, gently, murmured something about trade wars and late harvests, and before anyone could notice, I swapped my glass with his. They were identical. No one blinked. Minutes later, Richard raised his glass, toasted loudly in my direction, and took a long drink. He didn't collapse. That would have been too simple, too dramatic. But I watched the shift happen. His face flushed, then paled. His speech slowed. He leaned on the table, confused, murmuring to no one in particular. Then he laughed, high-pitched and strange. "You said she'd sign today, didn't you, Evan?" he shouted suddenly, startling the nearby guests. "You promised she wouldn't suspect a thing." That she was ready to hand it all over. Silence rippled through the crowd. Evan froze. Elaine's smile disappeared. My heart did not pound. It stood still, cold and steady. Richard tried to speak again, but his words collapsed into a slur of syllables. A waiter rushed forward, helping him to a chair. I set my glass on the stone ledge beside me, untouched, and folded my hands in front of me. If you've made it this far, thank you for being here. This story isn't just about money. It's about watching the people closest to you decide you're more useful gone than alive. If you've ever felt quietly replaced, overlooked, or underestimated, this one's for you. And if you're watching from somewhere in the world where family means both love and danger, let me know in the comments. I'm listening. Now, let me tell you what happened before that night and what happened after. Because when you've built something from nothing, you don't let anyone take it from you. Not with poison, not with papers, not even with a smile. They told me retirement would feel like freedom, and in some ways it did. The morning after the party, I woke up without an agenda. No calls from legal, no crisis about talent contracts or failing affiliate deals. Just silence. Clean, uninterrupted silence. For the first time in over 40 years, no one needed a decision from me by 9 a.m. I could have gone to France that day if I wanted to. But instead, I found myself walking barefoot through my kitchen, staring at a half-drunk glass of wine I never touched. The morning sun lit up the crystal in a way that made the burgundy look almost black. I sold Langston Media for $88 million. The ink on the documents was barely dry. And still, something about that glass, and the moment I saw Evan near the drinks table the night before, refused to leave me alone. I poured the rest down the drain. My daughter, Elaine, called at noon. Her voice was too bright. "How are you feeling, Mom?" What a night, right? Everyone loved your speech. The video's already getting shared like crazy. I told her I felt fine. Better than expected. But I didn't tell her what I'd seen. Elaine married Evan 10 years ago. He'd been introduced to her at some conference in Seattle. He was presenting something about sustainable venture funds she was attending as a junior associate with a media startup I helped fund. Their chemistry had been instant, the kind that made people around them uncomfortable. I remembered their wedding day. Evan had that gleam in his eyes, ambition mixed with admiration, a man who wanted the world but also wanted people to know he deserved it. Elaine fell for it completely. Back then, he seemed like a safe bet, polished, educated, handsome, and yes, perhaps a little too polished. But I said nothing. Elaine was my only child, and after losing her father so early, I wanted her to have someone who made her feel chosen. For a time, Evan did. But not long after the honeymoon, little things started changing. Elaine gave up her job first. Just for a while, she said, to help Evan build his consultancy. Then came the investment in his startup, Revolve Ventures, which never quite revolved. Every time I asked how the business was doing, he gave me language pulled from startup articles. Early stage volatility, pre-monetization value creation, legacy capital realignment. All fluff, no numbers. When the party idea came up, Evan insisted on handling everything. "You deserve to be honored," he said. "Let me take care of the details." "You've done enough." He booked the caterers, the rentals. Even the invitations went through a design team of his choosing. The tagline they used made me chuckle. Celebrating the voice of a generation. My former assistant, Linda, who'd worked by my side for 20 years, called the day after she received her invite. "You sure you're okay letting your son-in-law run the show?" she asked. "You were always a details person." "I'm watching," I said. "Don't worry." Linda came to the party, of course. So did several old editors from our print years. Ted and Gloria from the Boston office, Calvin Berman, the grumpy programming genius who once built us a whole analytics platform because the one we bought annoyed him. My old mentor, Sylvia, who taught me never to let a good silence go to waste in an interview. They all came. And so did Richard. Richard Lamontagne, Evan's father, was a retired federal judge from New Hampshire. He had the posture of a man used to being listened to, and the smile of someone who only deployed it when useful. We'd spoken a handful of times. He never called me Dorothy, only Mrs. Langston, with the faintest suggestion that I hadn't quite earned my seat at the table. He showed up to the party in a blue linen suit and a gold pocket square, uninvited but not unexpected. Evan introduced him like a prize. "Dad flew in just to celebrate you," he told me. "He says people like you don't happen twice in a lifetime." I gave him my practice smile, the one I used in boardrooms when someone tried to correct me mid-sentence. "He's right," I said. "We don't." What I noticed throughout the evening were the glances. Evan moving through the party like a gracious host, refilling drinks, shaking hands, making toasts, but always watching me, Richard watching him, Elaine, caught between their orbit trying to be the glue, and me? I was watching them all. Something was wrong. I felt it in the small gestures, the way Evan made sure I drank only from a particular glass, the way he checked in with Richard after every speech, every pause, every laugh line, the way Elaine, bless her, looked at me like she was preparing for a conversation she didn't want to have. That night, after the guests had left and the staff had packed the tables, I sat alone in the garden. The string lights above me swayed in the breeze. A few empty wine bottles still sat in their tubs of melting ice. Somewhere near the rose bushes, a champagne flute had tipped over, forgotten. I thought about legacy. How hard we try to build something that lasts. Not just companies, but trust, love, safety. We pour ourselves into it, believing it will stand on its own someday. But legacies can be stolen. If you're not careful, they're rewritten by people who smile while holding the pen. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because I was awake. More awake than I'd been in years. By morning, I already knew what I needed to do. 3 months before the party, Evan asked if I had ever considered hiring a more modern financial advisor. We were sitting in my den after dinner. Elaine had cooked that night, an ambitious eggplant lasagna that didn't quite hold together but tasted like effort. Evan was sipping bourbon, legs crossed, pretending to admire a photo of me receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Media Foundation. I'd seen that look before. Not interest, but calculation. "Not that your current guy isn't doing a fine job," he said. "But given the size of your portfolio now, there are some wealth strategies that could protect your assets long term, like next-level tax shielding, asset movement, that kind of thing." I smiled. "My current guy," I replied, "is a woman, and she's been with me since I had 4 digits in my account. If there's a level above next level, she's already on it." He chuckled, polite, but his eyes didn't. A week later, Elaine brought it up during a walk around the lake near my house. It was one of those early spring days when the wind hasn't decided if it wants to be warm or not, and everything smells like damp bark. "I just think you've earned some ease, Mom," she said. "You don't need to carry all of this on your shoulders anymore. What's the point of building a life like yours if you don't let someone else help carry it toward the end?" Toward the end. It landed softly, like a feather across the cheek, but it stung anyway. I kept walking, letting the silence stretch. She didn't mean harm. I believe that. Elaine has always been torn between admiration and fatigue when it comes to me. Growing up with a mother who worked 12-hour days, ran newsrooms, negotiated deals over dinner, and only slowed down when she was forced to. Well, it leaves marks. I wasn't the PTA type. I didn't bake for school events. But I showed her how to own a room. I showed her what it meant to never owe a man your independence. "I'm not saying you're old," she added quickly, "but you've done enough. You should enjoy what you've built." That word again. Should. The invisible leash around so many women's throats. I told her I'd think about it. That seemed to satisfy her. Later that month, Evan sent over a proposal from someone named Dylan Strathmore. "An exceptional fiduciary," he said, "with a specialty in legacy transitions and senior wealth structuring." The PDF was 28 pages long, full of graphs and bullet points and acronyms I didn't need explained. I'd lived too long in boardrooms not to know when someone was pitching control in the name of convenience. What caught my eye, though, was the section labeled Authority Delegation Structures. It was subtle. Just a few sample clauses suggesting how a power of attorney could streamline asset reallocation in urgent care scenarios. No red flags, unless you knew what you were looking for. I knew. I closed the file and deleted it. That same week, Evan invited me to a lunch with a couple from his investment circle, Paul and Serena. They were active lifestyle consultants, which apparently means they help wealthy retirees manage health, travel, and estate concerns through integrated service models. They smiled too widely, spoke too quickly, and dropped the word safety into every third sentence. "Your home is beautiful," Serena said, glancing around my kitchen like she was appraising it for staging. "But have you ever considered something easier? A residence with on-site medical, culinary, and leisure support? No stairs, no hassle. A place where you're seen—" "I've been seen quite a lot," I replied. "National TV, in fact." Evan laughed too loudly, then offered to refill my tea. That evening, I sat in my office with the lights off, just me and the hum of the house. I looked around at the framed photographs, the awards, the shelves of marked-up manuscripts, everything I'd built from scratch, everything I still remembered, every deal, every failure, every late-night headline I chased. I thought about the past 3 months, the subtle nudges, the concerned tones, the idea that aging means surrendering your autonomy, gently and gratefully. And then I thought about Evan. His tone wasn't concerned. It was practiced. He wasn't worried about my well-being. He was measuring timelines, patience, leverage. He wasn't waiting for me to collapse. He was planning to help gravity along if needed. That was the night I stopped doubting myself. That was the night I stopped hoping I was wrong. That was the night I started watching everything. Richard started talking just as the applause for my speech faded. At first, I thought he was just trying to be charming, add a few fatherly words to the moment, as if he were somehow part of the occasion. He stepped forward with a champagne flute in one hand and the other gesturing vaguely toward the crowd. The sun had just dipped below the tree line, casting the garden in that golden light people pay photographers to fake. But the warmth in the air didn't match the cold sliding into my stomach. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard said, swaying slightly, "what an honor it is to be here, to witness the passing of a legacy, a transfer of greatness, if you will." Several heads turned. People weren't sure if this was part of the program or just a self-appointed speech. I saw Evan stiffen near the buffet table, holding a shrimp canapé in midair like it had personally offended him. Richard continued, blinking slowly. "You all heard it. 88 million. That's not nothing. And Evan, my son, he's worked so hard to, make sure everything's ready. Everything is lined up. Just as we said." He looked out at the crowd, then over at me, then back to his son. "We did say she'd sign it all today, right? Or was that supposed to be tomorrow?" The hush that fell over the garden wasn't immediate. It rippled. Confusion first, then understanding. Evan dropped the canapé. He was across the lawn in seconds, putting a hand on his father's back, laughing, too loud, too forced. "Okay, Dad, that's enough champagne for you. Let's get you a glass of water, yeah?" Richard resisted at first. No, wait, what's the rush? They haven't even brought the papers yet." "Dad," Evan said sharply, gripping his elbow, "let's go." He ushered Richard away from the crowd toward the side of the house, murmuring something low and firm that I couldn't catch. I didn't move, not even when Elaine stepped up next to me and placed a hand gently on my arm. Her smile was tight, trembling at the corners. "He gets confused sometimes," she said. "It's nothing. Just age." I glanced at the wine glass in my hand, not the one Evan had given me, the other one, the safe one, the one I'd poured myself from a fresh bottle once the guests had arrived. I brought it to my lips and took a sip. It was smooth, deep, and completely unremarkable. Just wine. Nothing burned, nothing tingled, nothing twisted in my stomach. I watched Elaine watching me, and I realized then that she didn't know, or at least not all of it. There was still softness in her concern, but her eyes darted once toward where Evan had disappeared with his father, and something about the way her fingers curled against the side of her dress told me she was afraid of what might come next. The conversations around us resumed, but they sounded thinner now, more polite than interested. People stole glances toward the edge of the lawn where Richard had vanished. A few guests whispered behind their flutes. The string quartet picked up a song with an overly cheerful tempo, as if to pretend nothing odd had happened. I took another sip of wine, not because I wanted to drink, but because I needed a gesture that looked ordinary. Inside, something had settled. A knowing. For weeks, I'd suspected. For months, really, if I was being honest with myself. But suspicion is easy to explain away. It lets you doubt your doubt. It allows you to hold on to the people you love, even when they're starting to slip into roles you never imagined for them. But now I'd seen Evan spike my wine. I'd seen him hand me that glass, carefully, smiling, calling it a celebration. I'd seen him glance sideways at his father, his accomplice, or maybe just his pawn. I'd seen Richard speak the truth with the clumsiness of someone whose filter had dissolved. And I'd seen the moment Evan's performance cracked under pressure. I knew. There's a point in every storm where the wind stops being random. It gathers, focuses, sharpens. That's how it felt in my chest as I stood there, the stem of my wineglass cool between my fingers, the lies unraveling in real time. Elaine leaned in and said, "Do you want me to say something to the guests? Maybe thank them for coming, start wrapping it up?" I looked at her, really looked. She was still the little girl who used to build pillow forts under my desk during late-night editing sessions. Still the teenager who cried when I missed her first solo in choir. Still the woman who called me the night before her wedding and whispered, "I hope I'm doing the right thing." But I didn't know what she was now. "No," I said gently. "Let them stay. Let's not rush anything." I smiled, turned toward the crowd, and raised my glass. "To new beginnings," I said, "and to endings that come dressed as celebrations." The sound of a truck engine idling outside my gate woke me earlier than usual. I glanced at the clock. 6:47 a.m. I hadn't set an alarm. I hadn't needed to. After the night before, my body had stayed alert, like it knew something wasn't finished. I pulled on a cardigan over my nightgown, stepped into my slippers, and walked toward the front window. A large white delivery truck was parked just outside the gate. On the side, in clean blue letters, it read, "Silver Horizon Home Care Solutions." 2 men were unloading equipment, what looked like a hospital bed frame, a rolling IV pole, and a few large boxes with medical labels. One of them carried a clipboard. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice still groggy but firm. The younger of the 2 men looked up and smiled like this was a perfectly normal thing. "Morning, ma'am. We've got a delivery scheduled for inside setup. Hospital bed, motorized recliner, walker, and medication fridge. Name on the order is Dorothy Langston." My breath stilled. I stepped down the porch stairs slowly. "I didn't order anything," I said. He checked his clipboard. "It says here it was arranged by Evan Lamontagne. Said you were recently discharged from an overnight evaluation and needed supportive home care. This the right address?" I nodded once. "It is. But I haven't been to a hospital, and I certainly haven't asked for any of this." The second man glanced at the first, a little uncomfortable now. "Want us to call him?" "We have his number from the invoice." "No," I said quickly. "That won't be necessary. Please hold off on unloading anything else. I need a moment." I turned, walked back into the house, and shut the door quietly behind me. My hands were steady, but only because I made them be. Discharged from an evaluation? I walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove. The rhythmic click of the burner lighting grounded me more than the tea would. This wasn't just a delivery, it was a narrative. Someone, somewhere, was beginning to write a version of my life where I was already fragile, already compromised, already halfway to surrender. By the time the kettle whistled, I had replayed every detail of the previous night. Evan's urgency, Richard's slip, Elaine's tension. It all aligned now with perfect, horrifying clarity. This delivery wasn't a mistake. It was a prop, a physical piece of a larger stage they were preparing to usher me onto, a role I hadn't auditioned for. I made the tea and brought it to the sunroom. From there, I could see the truck still waiting. The men were on their phones now, clearly uncertain whether to proceed or leave. I sipped slowly, bitter, unsweetened, the way I liked it. My first instinct was to call Elaine, to ask if she knew. But I didn't. I needed to be sure. I needed to see how far they'd take it before I let them know I was watching. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find the younger delivery man again, this time with a sheepish look. "Mr." Lamontagne confirmed, he said. "He says he'll be by later this afternoon to check everything's installed properly. Wants us to go ahead." I smiled. "Tell Mr." "Lamontagne, thank you for his concern, but I'm not accepting deliveries today. Kindly take everything back." He hesitated. "Ma'am, we're under instruction." I raised a hand. "You've done your part. I won't sign for it. That ends your responsibility, yes?" He nodded slowly, unsure. "Thank you," I said. "Have a safe drive back." I watched them load the equipment again, a little less careful this time. One of the boxes thudded hard onto the truck floor. When they were gone, I locked the front door and pulled every curtain in the house closed. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my legal pad and started a new column. Planted evidence of dependency. Home care delivery before any diagnosis. Laying groundwork for guardianship. I wrote the date in the corner, drew a box around it. They were accelerating the plan. Maybe because Richard had spoken too much. Maybe because I didn't react the way they'd expected. Maybe because they thought the moment was ripe. I stood, walked back to the sunroom, and looked at the now empty driveway. From the outside, my life still looked like a victory. Successful retirement. Beautiful home. Daughter happily married. Enough wealth to last 2 lifetimes. But someone was rewriting the ending. Quietly. Efficiently. With paperwork and professional smiles. What they hadn't calculated was how well I read subtext. After all, I'd built a media empire by knowing which quote to trust, and which silence meant everything. I hadn't seen Eliza Tanley in over 20 years, not since the launch of our 3rd regional newsroom in Portland. Back then, she was still anchoring the 7 o'clock sharp as a scalpel, with a voice that could cut through static. I remembered how she walked into a press conference like it was her courtroom and made senators sweat under the lights. She'd left media just before I sold the company. Word had it she went back to law school at 48, remarried at 50, and then built a reputation as one of the fiercest elder law attorneys on the West Coast. I hadn't reached out before because I hadn't needed to. Now I did. I'd already sent the email the night the medical bed arrived. Short, direct, no details, just the subject line. "I think I'm being slowly erased. Can we talk?" By morning, she had replied with one line, "You bring the records. I'll bring the espresso. 11 a.m. sharp." Her office sat above an old stationery shop in a historic brick building that still smelled of glue and sun-aged paper. No receptionist, no buzzing sign. Just a brass plate on the door that read, E. Tanley, J.D., Estate Defense and Elder Safeguards. When she saw me, she didn't smile right away. She looked at my eyes the way a doctor might examine a patient who says, "I'm fine," too fast. Then she pulled me into a hug. "You look exactly the same," she said. "Except now I believe you when you say you don't trust people." We sat at a table by the window. She poured strong coffee into 2 mismatched mugs and waited while I handed over a thin manila folder. "Only the basics," I said. "So far." She flipped through the pages silently. Printouts of the delivery invoice from the home care company, notes I'd taken on Evan's earlier suggestions, and a transcription of what Richard had said at the party. Based on my own recording. I'd started carrying a pocket recorder years ago out of habit, and thank heavens I never stopped. When she finished, she took off her glasses and looked at me with that same investigative stare I remembered from the newsroom. "Dorothy," she said slowly, "this isn't uncommon. but it's rare to catch it this early. I waited. Men in your position are written about. Women in your position are written off, especially when the betrayal's coming from inside the family. You wouldn't believe how many wealthy women I've represented whose children or in-laws tried to gently push them into guardianship. Medical claims, mental fatigue, document confusion, sudden interest in protecting their legacy. It's a genre at this point. My jaw tightened. But why the medical gear first? Why not just have me declared unfit through the court? She nodded. Because guardianship requires a process, and you're still too articulate, too active. So they start with soft staging. They create doubt around your capabilities. They introduce help that you didn't ask for. Then they wait for a moment you're vulnerable. Maybe you forget one thing or get dizzy for a second. Then the narrative writes itself. They nearly slipped last night, I said, recounting the moment with the wine glass and what Richard had said. She raised her eyebrows. You need to stop using the attorney Evan recommended, immediately, and don't let that man file another sheet of paper under your name. I already called and ended the retainer this morning, I said. Told him I was going in another direction. He didn't even ask why, just said, "Good luck, Dorothy," like he was already washing his hands of me. She snorted. Good. That means you're no longer a pawn in his game. I leaned in. What do I do next, Eliza? How do I not just defend, but flip this? She sat back, thinking, then pulled a yellow legal pad toward her. First, we tighten every document. Power of attorney, healthcare proxy, financial accounts, trusts. Everything gets reviewed and locked. Second, we document everything. Every visit, every call, every unsolicited suggestion or action by Evan or Elaine. And third, she paused. We create our own paper trail. So if anyone tries to challenge your competency, the record speaks for itself, and they look like the ones with an agenda. I nodded, heart steadying. And what about the company? My sale went through, but the residual assets, licensing, real estate, royalties, still sit under my name. Some are held in legacy trusts, others in holding companies. Her eyes lit up like she was back chasing a lead. Good. That gives us leverage. We build a firewall so high they can't even see the peak. And if they ever push too hard, we have the receipts. I looked out the window as she began drafting a plan. Outside, the city moved like it always had. Unbothered, fast, loud. But inside that room, everything had slowed to a pulse I could finally hear again. I wasn't cornered. I was awake. And I wasn't alone. It was 12:17 a.m. when my phone buzzed beside the lamp. I hadn't been asleep. I just closed my eyes to the quiet hum of my thoughts, letting them drift through every detail of the day. The delivery, the bed, the way Evan had, looked too eager at dinner, then too quiet when I didn't play along. The screen lit up with his name. Evan Lamontine. Mobile. I picked it up, let it ring twice more before answering. Dorothy here, I said calmly, voice level. His was cheerful. Too cheerful. Hi, Mom. Sorry, hope I didn't wake you. Just thought I'd check in. I waited. I know yesterday was a lot, he added. The party, the speeches, the wine, it's a lot for anyone, especially someone who just wrapped up such a long, meaningful chapter. I let the pause hang. Then I smiled into the silence. Well, Evan, I didn't drink that much. But someone else might have gotten their glasses mixed up. There it was. That tiny hitch, barely half a second, but I felt it like a breeze under a door you thought was sealed. Oh? He said, trying too hard to sound confused. Did something happen? I suppose it depends on who remembers what, I replied. Your father seemed a little disoriented, said something curious into the microphone, didn't he? Another pause, then a chuckle, thin, calculated. Oh, you know Dad. He's always been a little unpredictable after 2 drinks. Probably shouldn't have let him near the Cabernet, right? I said softly. Cabernet. Was that what was in my glass? He went quiet for a full beat. Then, in a different voice, lower, slower, he said, "Are you feeling all right, Mom?" I leaned back in bed, watching the soft orange streetlight stretch across the ceiling. "I feel perfectly fine, Evan. Thank you for asking." Clear-headed, strong. Very much myself, I let each word land. "Good," he said quickly. "Good, just checking. I worry sometimes, you know. You've been under a lot of pressure, selling the company, adjusting to retired life. Transitions like these can be stressful." I bit back a laugh. "Stress has never been my weakness," I said. "I built a media empire while nursing a newborn and running a household where no one remembered to replace the coffee filters. I'm not new to pressure." He shifted again. Of course. I just meant, physically, emotionally. Elaine worries, too. She mentioned you seemed tired lately." I didn't answer right away. Then I spoke, slow and deliberate. "You know, Evan, what I've learned over the years? People only describe women as tired when they want them to stop being difficult." Silence. I imagined him sitting in his office, dim desk lamp on, maybe still in his dinner jacket, hand tightening around his phone. "So," I continued lightly, "thank you for your concern. But I assure you, I'm not confused, I'm not tired, and I remember exactly what I saw last night." Another silence. This one longer. Finally, he said, "Dorothy, I think you're reading too much into things. It was just a party. Everyone was emotional, and some were sloppy. I'm not sure what you're insinuating." "No need to be sure," I replied. "I just find it odd. The timing of everything, the sudden interest in my health, the new devices arriving at my door without my consent, the lawyer you introduced who somehow forgot to send me the originals of every document he drafted." He exhaled sharply. "Look, I'm sorry if you feel overwhelmed. That was never the intent. I thought you'd be relieved to know that Elaine and I were thinking ahead about your comfort, your safety." "Oh, I believe that," I said. "You've been thinking ahead for months now." A pause again. This time the mask slipped, just for a second. "You know, Dorothy," he said, voice tightening, "sometimes we don't realize when it's time to let others help us, especially people who genuinely care." "I couldn't agree more," I replied, matching his tone. "That's why I've decided to review everything, my accounts, my estate plan, my healthcare arrangements, with someone who's known me longer than you have." He didn't reply right away. Then, a chill in his voice. "Are you planning changes?" "Not planning," I said. "Actively doing." Click. The silence crackled between us. Finally, he tried a laugh again. It didn't land. "Well, Mom, if you need anything, just ask. We're always here. Just want the best for you. And I'm sure you'll be watching closely to make sure I get it," I said. The call ended a few moments later, polite, distant. But when I hung up, I didn't feel fear. I felt steady. He knew that I knew. And now, the clock had started ticking, for both of us. I had almost forgotten about the security system. Back when the media company was still mine, I'd overseen a project on privacy breaches, one of those exposés that won awards and lawsuits in equal measure. Since then, I've kept my own system updated, quiet, discreet, and unlisted. Not even Elaine knew the backyard camera still rolled. After Evan's midnight call, I couldn't sleep. At sunrise, I wrapped myself in a shawl, made a cup of black tea, and walked into the small side room I used to call my tech nook. The monitors were covered, but the light on the modem blinked green, still active. I sat down, heart calm, hands steady. I pulled up the archive for the day of the retirement party. It took nearly an hour, fast-forwarding through deliveries, catering staff, florists, and fuss. But then, just after 5:20 p.m., I paused. Evan. Alone. He stood at the far edge of the yard behind the arbor where the wisteria had begun to droop from the heat. He was partially obscured, but not enough to hide his hands. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, dark-capped bottle. He uncapped it, tilted it slightly, studied it. My fingers curled tighter around the mouse. Then he looked over his shoulder, placed the bottle back into his pocket, and walked toward the patio, toward the drinks table. I didn't exhale until the clip ended. A few minutes later, I was sitting across from Eliza in her downtown office, the small screen between us glowing with the paused footage. She watched it silently, then leaned back, adjusting the gold-rimmed glasses that always seemed too elegant for a woman who could shred a deposition in 3 sentences. "You know what this is, right?" she said, not taking her eyes off the image. "This isn't just circumstantial. It's motive. It's intent. And it's recorded." I nodded. "Should I call the police?" She turned to me then, voice lower. "Not yet. It's tempting. But if we push now, it becomes your word versus theirs. They'll say you misunderstood, that it was essential oils or medicine. They'll say Richard was tired. You'll look like a paranoid woman who can't handle aging." I swallowed. She was right. Eliza leaned forward. "Let them dig. Let them move faster. Every move they make now will be another thread in the net. But only if we're watching." I sat back in my chair, staring at the frozen frame of Evan's hand around that tiny bottle. There had been times in my career where a single photograph changed the fate of a public figure. A frame like this was more than just proof. It was leverage. "Eliza," I said, "I want to trap them with their own blueprint." She nodded slowly. "Then we don't confront. We invite." I tilted my head. "You let them think you're falling for it," she said. "Sign a few things, but nothing binding. Appear cooperative. Tired, if necessary. Buy time. Meanwhile, I'll begin assembling affidavits. We'll contact a judge quietly." In parallel, I smiled. There was a familiar rhythm returning to me. The quiet stacking of evidence. The precise build-up before the takedown. "May I keep a copy?" she asked. "Of course." We sat in silence for a few more minutes, the screen still frozen. The sun had begun to move behind her blinds, stripes of light falling across Evan's face. "You know," Eliza said finally, "a lot of women in your position freeze. They don't want to believe their family could do something like this." I looked at her, deadpan. I didn't want to believe it either. But disbelief doesn't stop a storm. It just leaves your windows open. She smiled. "Then let's start closing them." I walked out of her office with a copy of the footage in a flash drive tucked inside my purse, next to a pack of gum and my grandmother's rosary. I wasn't religious, but some rituals carry protection just from being held. At home, I sat on my porch, listening to the garden. The birds didn't know anything had changed, but I did. I knew what I'd seen, and now I knew what to do. By Wednesday, the threads began to show themselves. Not just one plan, not just a hasty scheme, but a layered, deliberate architecture of control. It started with a letter, slipped into my mail slot without postage. No envelope, just a folded page from a local wellness clinic, vaguely titled and full of euphemisms. At the bottom, a signature, Dr. Calvin Brent. I didn't know him, never met him. Yet the letter stated I had exhibited concerning signs of early-stage memory disruption, and that a supportive care plan had been informally initiated through family request. I stared at that page for a full minute before calling Eliza. "He's laying groundwork," she said flatly after reading it, "to challenge your competency." I felt my jaw tighten. They think if they chip away quietly, no one will hear the house falling. "They don't expect resistance," she added, "especially not from someone your age." I exhaled slowly. "Then let's make the floorboards creak." That afternoon, I called the number on the paper, pretending to be a concerned relative. The receptionist didn't hesitate. "Oh yes," she chirped. "Miss." Langston's family asked us to monitor and advise on age-related cognitive decline. "Would you like to schedule a follow-up assessment?" I hung up. It was one thing to suspect Evan had hired a doctor, another to hear it confirmed so openly, so casually, as if I were a spreadsheet being moved to the next column. That night, I noticed new faces outside the house. A white sedan parked 2 houses down, a man walking a dog he never seemed to let off leash, a woman jogging who circled the block 6 times without breaking a sweat. It wasn't paranoia, it was choreography. And then, Friday morning, the bell rang. I opened the door to 2 young women in uniform blue polo shirts with soft pastel logos stitched near the collar. Behind them was a man unloading boxes from a van with the same emblem, Serenity In-Home Living. "Good morning, Ms. Langston." The taller of the 2 smiled. "We're here to set up your new wellness living experience." I said nothing. She continued. "We've got a sleep monitor system, fall prevention bed rails, adaptive utensils, and a personalized nutrition tracker. It should only take about an hour to install. Mr. Evan handled all the details for you." She said his name like he was doing me a favor. "I didn't order anything," I replied, flat. She looked momentarily confused. "Oh, it's all been prepaid and scheduled for today. We're just here to assist and help with onboarding." "I see." I stepped aside and let them in. Not because I was intimidated, because I wanted to know exactly what they thought they were installing. Eliza would want the receipts, and frankly, so would I. As they unboxed, I noticed a binder among the equipment labeled Compliance Documentation. I watched the shorter woman place it on my kitchen counter and step away to plug in a motion sensor. I walked over, opened the binder, and skimmed the first few pages. There it was: daily observations, caregiver interaction reports, medication support suggestions, all written in language that made it seem like I had already consented to supervised living. My fingers tightened around the binder. "Miss Langston, do you have a preferred schedule for visits?" the shorter one asked gently. "Most clients find mornings easiest for their routines." I turned to her. "What day am I being moved into the assisted living facility?" I asked quietly. Her face blanched. I don't know anything about that. You're just installing the soft trap before the iron cage." She blinked. "Excuse me?" I smiled. "Tell Evan this was a lovely rehearsal. The real performance will be in court." They packed faster than I thought possible. Within 15 minutes, the van pulled away and my porch was quiet again. But inside, something had changed. No more guessing. No more giving the benefit of the doubt. This wasn't a misunderstanding or overprotection. It was conquest in polite packaging. That evening, Eliza came over. We went through the binder together, page by page. She took pictures of everything, noting names, company registration numbers, and keywords. "There's an appointment next Thursday," she said, "with a notary and a legal witness listed. I guarantee you they plan to bring papers for you to sign, probably medical proxies, maybe even power of attorney. They wanted me to feel grateful for the help," I said. She nodded. "And then hand them your keys." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "I built an empire out of timing," I murmured, "knowing when to publish, when to pull, when to pivot. And now? Now I wait. Wait for what? For them to show up. Papers in hand, with their kind smiles and poisoned intentions. And when they do," Eliza smiled before I finished, "we'll have the recorder running." That night, I sat alone again, but it didn't feel the same. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't even angry. I was alert, focused. They thought they could redefine me on paper before I had the chance to resist. They didn't know I had already begun writing a counter-narrative, and it started with telling the truth. In media, we used to say, "Perception isn't the shadow of truth, it's the shape of reality." I built a career on understanding what people believed, not what they knew. So if they were building a file on me, creating a portrait of a frail woman losing grip, I would give them the brush and guide their hand, let them paint exactly what I wanted them to see. It started that morning with my phone call to the bank. I sat at my kitchen table, phone on speaker, knowing the security camera above the cabinet captured both audio and a perfect wide shot. The same system Evan insisted I modernize a year ago, now turned into my quiet accomplice. "Hi there, this is Dorothy Langston," I said, purposefully pausing halfway through my own name. "I need help accessing my account. I think I've forgotten the code." Again, the voice on the other. End was pleasant, cheerful. "Of course, miss." Langston: "Do you have your security questions ready?" "Oh, I think I used my daughter's wedding date. Or was it the dog's name?" I gave a slow, hesitant laugh. "It's all a bit muddled lately, I'm afraid." I repeated my address twice, adding a small stammer, fumbled my birth date by a day, asked 3 times where to click on the website, all of it recorded, carefully curated, just enough to be concerning, never outright alarming. When I ended the call, I waited exactly 2 minutes before texting Eliza. "Showtime," she responded with a single thumbs-up emoji. That afternoon, I left a printed note on my kitchen counter and angled it just within view of the hallway camera. "Call Evan. Remind me what the lawyer's name is again." I underlined lawyer twice, as if I was grasping at something I couldn't quite remember. Then, for good measure, I walked around the garden wearing 2 mismatched shoes and humming a lullaby from my daughter's childhood, loud enough to be picked up. I wasn't losing my mind. I was baiting a trap, and sure enough, they noticed. The next morning, I received a bouquet of sunflowers and a note. No card, no name, just a post-it stuck awkwardly to the vase. "Thinking of you. If things feel confusing, we're here to help." I laughed out loud. A day later, Evan called. "Hi, Mom. Just checking in. You sounded a little distracted on the bank call." Elaine was worried. "Everything okay?" I kept my voice soft. "Oh, that. Yes, silly me. I kept mixing up the passwords with the grocery list. You know how it gets." He waited a beat too long before responding. "Maybe you should let someone else handle that stuff for a while." "Maybe," I replied, "but I still like knowing what's mine." Later that week, I left an old planner on my coffee table, the kind with big handwriting and circled appointments. I deliberately misspelled pharmacy and accountant on 2 pages, highlighted them both. The next day, someone went through it. I know because the page corner was folded differently. I don't know if it was Evan or the care coordinator who had started making surprise drop-bys again, but someone saw it. That was enough. By Friday, I received an email from a lawyer I didn't know, CC'd with Elaine and Evan. It was couched in polite concern, offering guidance on estate simplification, mentioning gentle transition planning, and attaching a draft support agreement. They were getting ready. Eliza read it and smiled. They've taken the bait. This document is a landmine of assumptions. The language presumes consent, implies diminished capacity, and seeks preemptive control. They're preparing to make a move. "Good," I said, "then I'll make mine." We began preparing counter-documentation. Eliza guided me through a legal capacity assessment, certified, notarized, timed just before they would likely try to argue otherwise. I sat through each question with sharp clarity, even added humor. When they asked me to recall 5 words after a pause, I offered 6. The psychologist chuckled. "Someone still got it." I replied, "Someone never lost it." That assessment went into my private file. Alongside it, I stored printed screenshots of Evan's text messages subtly urging simplification, his emails nudging me toward consolidation for peace of mind, and a log of every unsolicited visit from wellness services. Each item, on its own, looked harmless, but together they built a story. Not about a fading woman, but about a coordinated attempt to define me without my permission. That weekend, I accidentally forwarded Evan an old email chain between myself and a publisher about a potential memoir. In it, I had written, "There's power in being underestimated." Sometimes the best defense is letting them write your eulogy too early. He never replied. Instead, Elaine called, "Mom, have you been feeling okay?" "Just emotionally, I mean. This whole retirement thing, it's a big transition." "I'm fine, sweetheart. I worry sometimes you're isolating too much." "Oh no. I've actually been documenting everything. It's comforting. You know, I used to run half the newsroom with a clipboard." Elaine was quiet for a moment. "You've always been thorough." "I still am." And then I smiled because I knew she understood. Not the details, but the undertone. The same way I once taught her how to listen between the sentences, not just to them. The next time someone knocked on my door to check in, I offered them tea, then turned on the piano and played a ragtime tune from memory. When they asked if I needed help remembering my appointments, I pointed to the kitchen whiteboard, color-coded, alphabetized, flawless. And when they asked what I was working on these days, I said, "Just organizing old files. You never know when a good story might come in handy." Perception was power. And I was no longer just defending mine. I was shaping theirs. It was just after 8 in the evening when I heard the chime from my private email. I wouldn't have checked it, but the subject line read, "You don't know me, but I know Evan." I stared at the screen for a moment. The message came from an address with no name, just a string of random letters. The body read, "This isn't the first time he's done this. He did it to my stepmother. Florida. 2017. If you want to know more, reply yes." There was no warmth in the words, but something told me this wasn't a prank. The tone was cold, precise, and the fact that she used the past tense, "he did it," sent a chill I couldn't shake. I forwarded it to Eliza without comment, then sat still for almost a full minute before typing, "Yes." The reply came 6 minutes later, this time with a name. Mira Kellerman. I was with Evan when I was 24. We lived together in Tampa for just over a year. He was charming at first, but then came the questions about my stepmother, her estate, her insurance. He said it was just curiosity, but it never was. Attached were photos. One was of Mira and Evan, arms wrapped around each other, dated September 2016. Another showed a different woman, older, in a wheelchair, at what looked like a marina. Then came a court document, Hillsborough County Probate Case 2017-04832, a petition filed by the estate of Valerie Stinson against Evan Lamontagne for undue influence and asset misappropriation. My breath caught. I hadn't expected this. I had suspected Evan was manipulative, even strategic in the most conniving ways, but not serial. Eliza called within minutes. "I'm going through the Florida file now. This is real, Dorothy. The case was sealed after a private settlement in 2018, but there's enough public record to make it useful. More importantly, the pattern is nearly identical." She sent over excerpts, an elder woman suddenly transferring property, a caretaker hired for her own safety, an attempted change in power of attorney that was reversed last minute. Mira's name was in the witness list. She had testified before the case was buried. A new email came in as we spoke. It was a voicemail recording. Mira's voice, younger, frantic. He told her she was forgetting things. He made her believe she needed help, but it was all just to control the house. And when she resisted, he brought in a doctor who signed off on memory issues. But she was fine, just tired. It echoed too closely to what I was living now. I wrote back, "Why are you telling me this?" Her answer came quickly, "Because I didn't speak up in time last time." And I still remember what he said the night I left. Old women are easy to isolate. They want love, but they fear being alone. That's the leverage I had to put the phone down. It wasn't just strategy anymore. It was pathology. Evan didn't just stumble into this plan. He refined it, rehearsed it. My daughter may have been swept into his orbit believing he was ambitious, But I now saw the full picture. He was a man who hunted patterns, women past their prime, family tensions, wealth guarded by sentiment, and he knew exactly how to unlock every door. Later that evening, I asked Eliza a question I never thought I'd say out loud. If he's done this before, what stops him from doing it again? To someone else? Nothing, she said, unless we stop him now and we do it right. We discussed how to integrate Mira into the legal proceedings. Eliza said she could be a confidential informant or potentially a corroborative witness if we escalated to civil litigation. That night, I stared out at the magnolia tree just beyond my garden, the same one Evan once said blocked the resale view from the deck. I suddenly felt the weight of it all, not just the betrayal, but the gravity of nearly missing it. Mira ended her final email with a single sentence. I didn't save Valerie. But maybe I can help you save yourself, I whispered back to the screen. I'm already doing that. But thank you for helping me make sure I'm not the last. I knew what I had to do. By the time Mira's final email came through, the strategy had already shifted. No longer was I simply gathering proof. I was preparing the stage. Eliza and I reviewed every inch of what we'd collected: the Florida case, the backyard footage, the morning delivery, the doctor's note, the bank call, the patterns. Now it was time to make Evan believe I had finally surrendered. That afternoon, I sent a cheerful message in our family group chat, the one Elaine barely used and Evan never replied to unless it served him. I wrote, "Been thinking about everything. Maybe it is time I handed off some responsibilities. Let's talk this weekend. I'd feel better if it all stayed in the family," Evan answered first. "That's great news, Mom. Let me know when. We can bring the final draft over." Elaine followed a few minutes later. "You'll feel so much lighter, Mom. You're doing the right thing." I read her words 3 times. I wasn't sure anymore if she believed them out of love, fear, or a desire to finally stop being the daughter in the middle. Maybe she told herself that Evan was just helping. Maybe she didn't want to know more. Or maybe she did, but convinced herself it was normal. I wrote back, "How about Sunday? Quiet evening, just us. Let's do it here at home." Cozy. That was the hook. Eliza and I spent the next 2 days wiring the living room. Discrete cameras, audio mics built into a pair of brass candlesticks, one behind the frame of an old oil painting, another hidden in the seam of a ceramic lamp. We hired 2 off-duty officers through a protective services firm Eliza trusted. They'd wait in the study with her, connected to everything through a private feed. Sunday arrived crisp and windless. I wore the blue cardigan Elaine had given me last Christmas. It was itchy at the collar, but it made her believe I was still soft. They arrived right on time. Evan in his usual blazer holding a folio, Elaine carrying a bottle of white wine like it was a dinner gift, not a distraction. I greeted them with a smile that didn't reach my chest. We sat in the parlor. The fire flickered gently. Evan pulled out the folder and started with a warm voice. "Dorothy, we've simplified the documents a little. The power of attorney is narrowly tailored, just around investment accounts, nothing else. It's just to give us flexibility while markets shift." I nodded slowly, eyes on the page. Elaine added, "We thought it would make you feel safer to keep it within the family. So no outside firms, no strangers." I glanced at her. "You mean, no lawyers?" Her lips tightened just enough to show the seam between belief and complicity. I tilted my head. "But it's such a cold evening. Wouldn't it be better if we brought this into the sitting room? More comfortable chairs. Besides, this table's always been wobbly." They agreed, and we walked into the room where everything was ready. The cameras blinked silently. The microphones buzzed to life. Eliza watched from the monitor, lips pressed tightly. The officers sat still behind the door, waiting. I let them pour the wine. Evan didn't touch his. He was focused. He laid out the documents. If you just initial here and here, then sign at the bottom, we can file this tomorrow. I took the pen. Let my fingers fumble slightly. Tell me again what this covers, I asked gently. Just the investments. Anything with volatility. It's standard. I've already had a financial advisor look over it. He gave that smile he thought was reassuring. He said it's exactly the kind of thing someone in your position should do. My position, Elaine added. And with the in-home nurse coming next week, we thought it best to align everything, make it all seamless. I paused, let the silence draw out just enough. Eliza said she'd want to look at it too, I said calmly. Evan's eyes flashed. You talked to Eliza? Of course, I said. She's a dear friend. She's just in the other room, actually. They both froze. Elaine blinked. Evan's lips parted, then closed again. And then came the knock. Eliza entered, calm, in control, carrying a single thin file. Behind her, 2 plainclothes officers stepped into view. Evan's color drained in real time. Eliza placed the file on the table. Before any signatures happen, I thought I should walk through a few things, including the footage from last Thursday and some notes from Hillsborough County. Elaine whispered, "What is this?" I turned to her, quiet and steady. "It's the truth, darling." The one I almost missed. The next few minutes unfolded without chaos. There was no yelling, no confrontation, just Evan stiffening as the officers asked him to sit, as they opened a conversation he thought would never come. Elaine held her breath through it all, and I stood very still, because I knew what we'd captured, and what would come next. The pen was still in my hand, but I'd never signed. I never would. I set the tea tray down with a calmness I didn't fully feel. The china clinked slightly as I adjusted the cups. Everything else was already in place. The soft lighting, the leather folder on the table, the faint scent of jasmine from the oil diffuser humming quietly behind me. All the details crafted to look unremarkable. The real document, the one Eliza and I had finalized at her office 3 nights earlier, was tucked underneath the first page. The one on top was for show, a decoy. The one beneath was real. It bore my signature already notarized, transferring the entirety of my estate, should I ever be deemed mentally incapacitated or forced to sign under duress, into a trust designated solely for charitable causes, literacy programs for women over 60, safe housing for elderly caretakers, and independent investigative journalism scholarships for underrepresented students. Causes I believed in. Causes that couldn't be twisted by hands like Evan's. The bell rang, right on time. I opened the door to see Elaine, smiling a little too brightly, holding a bouquet of hydrangeas. Evan was beside her, one hand gripping a leather briefcase and the other in his coat pocket, his eyes scanning the room behind me before stepping in. "Nice and cozy in here," he said, glancing at the fireplace, not bothering to hide the edge in his voice. Elaine leaned in and kissed my cheek. "We didn't mean to rush this, Mom. It's just, timing is important with some of the accounts." I nodded, ushering them toward the sitting area. "Of course, dear." "I understand. Let's just take our time today." The folder lay on the center table, exactly where Evan's eyes landed first. He opened it and flipped through, scanning the first page quickly. He didn't realize it was formatted differently from the last draft. He didn't care. He thought he had won. "We just need your signature on these last sections," he said, placing a pen in front of me. "Initial here. And here." Then full signature on the last page. I reached for the pen with steady hands. "Remind me, again, what exactly does this authorize?" I asked, carefully writing my initials in the margins where he pointed. Elaine sat beside me, fingers laced. "It's just consolidating investment rights. Letting Evan streamline a few of your larger holdings. Makes things easier while you relax." "While I relax," I echoed softly. Evan didn't wait. You'll still have full access to your accounts, of course. This is just a formality. Really? He handed me the final page. I took a long breath, then signed my name. Not on the top sheet, not on the one he thought I was signing, but on the real one, the one underneath, the one Eliza had helped me prepare, designed for this exact moment, designed to activate only if coercion or threats were recorded. I folded the papers back into the folder as if nothing happened. Evan exhaled in visible relief. "Perfect," he said. "We'll get this filed tomorrow." Then he leaned back in his chair and let his guard down. "You know, Mom," he said, tone shifting, "I'm glad you came around. Honestly, if we had to push this much further, I was going to have Dr. Helms do a full in-home evaluation tomorrow morning. We already have the Sunset Oak suite reserved, just in case you weren't feeling cooperative." Elaine stiffened slightly but didn't speak. He added, as if it were nothing, "You wouldn't like Sunset Oak. The walls are yellow. You hate yellow." I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch. The camera, embedded behind the clock on the mantel, blinked once. It had caught every word. I stood and poured the tea. "Would you like sugar?" I asked, voice even. Evan blinked, caught off guard by the domestic question. "No, I'm good," he said. Elaine whispered, "Is this really necessary, Evan?" He looked at her sharply but said nothing. I set the tea down and turned toward the hallway. "Eliza," I called gently, "would you come in now?" The shift was immediate. Evan's posture snapped upright. Elaine's head turned sharply. Eliza stepped into the room, composed, carrying her own copy of the signed document. Behind her, two discreet witnesses entered, one holding a small tablet with the live video feed still running, the other noting timestamps. Eliza's voice was calm. The transaction was recorded in full, with verbal coercion on tape. "Thank you for confirming." Evan stood, voice rising. "What the hell is this?" Elaine paled. "Mom, what is going on?" I looked directly at her. "What's going on, my dear, is that I signed the real document. Not the one your husband slipped in, the one we arranged with my legal counsel to ensure that if I were ever manipulated into giving up control, the entire estate would instead go to people who need it more than either of you do." Evan's mouth opened and closed. "You threatened to commit me," I continued, "to send me to a facility against my will, under a false pretense of cognitive decline. You brought a doctor onto my property without consent. You forged a diagnosis. You ordered medical equipment under my name. You crossed the line." Eliza handed him a copy of the evidence file. Evan's face turned a dull gray. "I'm not pressing criminal charges," I said quietly, "yet. But legal restraining orders will be filed by morning. Your name is no longer attached to any of my properties. And Elaine, my love, you'll receive a letter from the estate trustee soon. I hope someday you'll read it." Elaine's voice cracked. "You're cutting me off?" "I'm cutting off the rot," I replied. "If that includes you, that's your decision." The clock ticked once. Then again. No one spoke. The door closed behind them a few minutes later. Evan didn't say another word. Elaine glanced back once before the porch light blinked off. I stood alone in my living room, the scent of jasmine still lingering in the air. The pen was still warm in my hand. The clock in the hallway struck 3 when their car pulled into the driveway. I stood by the window, watching as Evan stepped out first, followed by Elaine. She was dressed for celebration, a sleek beige coat, small diamonds at her ears. Evan carried the leather folder I'd seen countless times before, the one he always brought when he thought he was closing a deal. I had tea waiting, the good china set out, curtains half drawn to make the room feel smaller, warmer, more intimate. The document was already on the table, neatly centered. The top sheet was his version, the one he'd expect me to sign. The real document, prepared by Eliza, legally binding and irrevocable, lay directly underneath, nearly identical in format except for one crucial clause. In the event of coercion, undue influence, or any proof of manipulation, my entire estate would transfer to a foundation benefiting elder advocacy and women's education. It bore a small watermark, nearly invisible, a quiet signature of my will. I opened the door before they rang the bell. "Come in," I said. "Let's keep this quick, shall we?" Evan gave me that rehearsed smile, the one that made his cheeks move but never touched his eyes. "Of course, Mom." "You look rested," Elaine followed with a nod and a practiced warmth. "It's good to see you, Dorothy." Truly, I led them into the living room, gesturing to the armchairs. "Everything's ready," I said. "Tea?" "No need," Evan said quickly. "Let's get this part done." "We'll toast after." He picked up the folder and opened it, checking the pages like a man pretending not to be eager. "Same version we discussed," he said, sliding the papers toward me. "This gives me investment authority and lets me restructure some holdings for your benefit." "All standard," Elaine added. "We've kept everything straightforward. Just initials here, and full signature on the back." I picked up the pen slowly, glancing down at the first page. My heart didn't race. My fingers didn't tremble. I was steadier than I'd felt in months. "Before I sign," I said, "tell me, what happens if I don't?" Evan laughed, too loud for the room. "What do you mean?" "If I choose not to sign anything today," I said evenly, "what then?" His smile faltered, just slightly. Then, with a tight breath, he said, "We'd have to make other arrangements. Look, this isn't adversarial, but time's important, and if we don't finalize this, I'll have to involve Dr. Helms. He's scheduled to start evaluations tomorrow, and Sunset Oak has a suite ready. You know the one. Second floor, nice view, good staff. They're expecting you." Elaine looked away, lips pressed together. I nodded once. Understood. I flipped past the first page, then the second, then the third, until I reached the final sheet, the one that looked like his, but wasn't, the one we'd prepared, notarized, and time-stamped with my team, the one that would render his efforts irrelevant the moment he crossed the line. I signed my name with slow, deliberate strokes. Evan exhaled in triumph. "Perfect. I'll send this over to legal today. By the end of the week, we'll have the new structures in place." He reached for the folder, but I placed my hand over it. "Would you like tea now?" He blinked. "What?" "Tea," I repeated, standing. "You said we'd toast." Elaine murmured, "I'll help you." We walked to the kitchen, and I let the quiet fill the space. As she reached for the cups, I turned to her. "Do you believe you've done the right thing?" She paused, fingers hovering over the handles. "I believe Evan wants what's best for you." "Do you?" Her hand trembled as she poured. When we returned, Evan was on the phone, likely calling someone to initiate whatever transfers he thought were now possible. He ended the call as we entered. "All set," he said. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" At that moment, the hallway camera blinked, the one hidden in the clock frame, the one wired directly to Eliza's private server. Every word recorded, every signature time-stamped, and most importantly, his threat. I sat and handed him the tea. "You were right, Evan," I said softly. "Sunset Oak doesn't suit me. Yellow walls make me nauseous." He stared at me. Then slowly, too slowly, his eyes drifted back to the folder. He opened it again, saw my signature, saw the page, and froze. He flipped upward, back to the beginning. It didn't match. He looked at me, truly looked, for the first time in a long while. "What is this?" "What I signed," I replied gently, "is a legal declaration that any document signed under pressure, manipulation, or threat are nullified. In those cases, all my assets pass into charitable trust. You didn't read the fine print. You didn't notice the watermark. But you were recorded." Elaine put her cup down, hands shaking. "Dorothy." "Don't," I said, eyes never leaving Evan. "You knew what he was doing." He stood, voice rising. "You can't do this." "That wasn't the agreement. We had a deal." "No," I said, standing with him. "You had a plan." I had a choice. Behind the hallway curtain, the door opened quietly. Eliza stepped in, followed by two plainclothes officers, each holding evidence files. One of them nodded at me and whispered something into a lapel microphone. "I'm not pressing charges," I said calmly. "Yet. But you are both now legally barred from accessing my property, accounts, or medical records. The court will receive the footage today, and the foundation will begin its work tomorrow." Evan stared at me with a hatred I'd never seen before. Not masked, not filtered, pure and unrepentant. Elaine's shoulders sank. She didn't argue. She didn't ask questions. They left 10 minutes later. I closed the door behind them, and for the first time since my retirement party, I allowed myself to breathe freely, not in fear, not in grief, but in relief, knowing the final act had begun on my terms. It began with a knock, firm and deliberate, not rushed, not hesitant, just official enough to shift the energy in the room. Evan looked up from the couch, his hand still resting on the folder. Elaine froze halfway to the hallway, where she had gone to retrieve her coat. I remained seated, sipping my tea slowly. "Are you expecting someone else?" Evan asked, eyes narrowing. "Not exactly," I said, placing the cup back into its saucer with a soft clink. The doorbell followed, and I stood up without haste. My knees didn't creak the way they used to. Strange how clarity could make even old bones feel newly awake. When I opened the door, two officers stood in uniform. One was younger, maybe early 30s, with a clean-shaven jaw and serious eyes. The other, a woman a decade older, wore a neutral expression that gave away nothing. Between them, the taller officer held out a sealed envelope. "Mrs. Dorothy Langston?" "That's me. We have a court order to investigate possible coercion involving an elder adult. This includes medical, financial, and behavioral assessments." He held up a second sheet with the state seal clearly visible. "May we come in?" I turned back toward the living room. "Come in, officers." "The tea is still warm." Evan stood quickly. "This is ridiculous. What's the basis for this? Who even filed—" "Sir," the female officer said calmly, "you'll have time to ask questions. For now, we're acting on legal authority granted by the district judge based on evidence submitted under affidavit." Elaine's face drained of color. I sat back in my chair as the officers walked in. "I assume you'll want access to the documents and surveillance logs." "We will," the younger officer said, "and if you have anything to add voluntarily, it would be helpful." I reached for the folder beside me, the one Evan had clutched so confidently earlier, and handed it to them. This contains what was signed today, including a certified copy of the clause about coercion. You'll also find timestamps and a copy of the video footage from the in-house security system. The female officer accepted it and began reviewing. Her eyes scanned quickly, brows slightly rising as she turned the first few pages. Evan took a step forward, voice raised. "She's being manipulated. Someone's feeding her all this. She's confused, clearly." "I'm sure that claim will be assessed," I said evenly. "But I should mention there's also a supporting affidavit from a former associate of yours, a woman named Mira Kellerman." Elaine's lips parted, eyes snapping to Evan. "Mira," he muttered. "You've got to be kidding me." "She submitted records from a similar case involving your former stepmother," I continued, folding my hands gently in my lap. "Different state, different year, but disturbingly similar language in the documents and physician's notes." "I had nothing to do with—" The female officer raised a hand. "Sir, I'll need you to stay seated." This isn't an interrogation. Yet Evan stared at me, jaw tense, nostrils flaring. I didn't flinch. The male officer took out a small device and connected it to the camera system mounted in the hallway. He nodded when the screen blinked to life. "Full time-stamped backup," I said. "Eliza Tanley, my attorney, also has copies stored off-site. I can give you her contact." He nodded again. We'll be speaking with her. Elaine sank into the nearest chair, her legs unable to keep her upright. This is a misunderstanding, she whispered. I looked at her, my voice calm. Elaine, I gave you so many chances to choose differently. She didn't respond. The officers spent the next several minutes inspecting the documents, confirming serial numbers, and reviewing the surveillance system layout. Everything was prepared. The conversations, the threats, the signatures, even the subtle movements of Evan pocketing the original version of the documents before realizing the switch. All of it was visible. When the officers turned to leave, the younger one nodded respectfully. Thank you for your cooperation, ma'am. We'll file this as per protocol. Will they be taken into custody? I asked. Not at this time, the woman replied, but they'll be under investigation and legally restrained from approaching you or accessing any medical or financial avenues on your behalf. Understood, I said. Evan stared at me one last time, his face a storm of disbelief and fury. You were never this smart before, he spat. I smiled gently. I was always this smart. You just never saw it because you were too busy seeing yourself. The door shut behind them, and for the first time in this house, silence didn't feel like fear. It felt like peace. After the officers left and the quiet returned to the house, I stayed in the armchair for a long while, my fingers resting against the cooling porcelain of my teacup. Evan's footsteps had thundered out the front door, but Elaine remained, unmoving. She hadn't said a word during the entire exchange. Now she stood near the bookshelf, her arms folded tightly, not in fear, but something else. Resentment, maybe. I watched her chest rise and fall slowly. There was a stillness in her that didn't match the panic I'd expected. You should leave with your husband, I said gently. It's over. She turned to me, her voice low but disturbingly calm. No, not yet. There was something in her tone that struck the back of my throat. I set the cup down. You knew, I said. Elaine's eyes met mine. I didn't just know. I was the one who suggested it. The air inside me collapsed. My body remained still, but something within folded in on itself. You... what? You think Evan came up with that pathetic plan on his own? She said. He barely had the guts to ask you to fund our honeymoon. I was the one who told him to talk to that doctor. I was the one who said you'd be vulnerable now that you retired. You built an empire but forgot how many people you left behind on the way up. Her voice didn't shake. Not once. I don't understand, I said quietly. Yes, you do. She took a step forward. All those years you were running media campaigns and flying across coasts, you missed birthdays, school recitals, every quiet Wednesday dinner. You missed me, Mom. I gave you everything I had, I whispered. Every opportunity, every resource, but never you, she said, and the way she said it was so cold, so final, that it scraped against the bone. You gave the world your genius. You gave strangers your time, your strategy, your voice, but you gave me absence. And now, you expect me to forget all that because you're finally slowing down? Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. Not yet. I needed to understand the full shape of this betrayal. So this was revenge? I asked. No, she said. It was balance. You owe me a life, and if you weren't going to give me your attention, at least you could give me what you built while ignoring me. That was fair. My mouth opened, but no words came. Elaine crossed her arms again. You built walls, Mom. Beautiful ones, made of awards and accolades and deadlines. I just found a way to walk around them. I shook my head slowly. I never thought, not you. Evan, maybe? But not my daughter. She gave a short, bitter laugh. You say that like you knew me. That was the final cut, clean and deep. She turned toward the door, but paused at the threshold. "I was never going to put you in a nursing home." That was Evan's part. I only wanted to make you feel what I felt growing up, small, invisible, and helpless. I gripped the arms of my chair. "You did." She looked back over her shoulder. "Good." And then she was gone. I sat there long after the door closed, staring at nothing. The storm had passed, but it hadn't left silence. It had left a scar, a jagged crack in the center of everything I thought I knew about motherhood, legacy, and love. All my life, I believed the cost of ambition was worth it, that my children would understand one day that success would trickle down in the form of pride. But I was wrong. I hadn't raised a grateful daughter. I had raised a woman who believed love was something to be avenged. In that moment, something in me collapsed, only to rebuild itself stronger. She was wrong about one thing. I did know her now, and knowing the full truth meant I was no longer vulnerable to the illusions, no longer willing to carry guilt that wasn't mine alone to bear. My grief would no longer paralyze me. It would clarify me, harden me, prepare me. This wasn't the ending. It was the beginning of something sharper, and it was mine. The silence after everything unraveled was unlike any I'd known, not heavy, not haunting, just still. The kind of stillness that comes after a storm doesn't destroy you but shows you who was willing to. Within a week, Evan's past caught up to him. It started with a quiet inquiry from a federal investigator who'd been watching a different case in Florida. Apparently, Mira's stepmother hadn't been the only woman manipulated into signing power of attorney under emotional distress. Evan had a pattern, and now a pattern is all it takes to turn a suspicion into a federal case. He was brought in for questioning. I didn't have to press charges myself. The tapes, the witnesses, the Florida case files Mira provided, everything aligned. The web he spun caught more than just me, and for once justice didn't need to raise its voice to be heard. It simply unfolded. Elaine, on the other hand, wasn't prosecuted. There wasn't enough to tie her directly to the legal coercion or the setup of false diagnoses. She was clever. She stayed behind the lines, offering just enough ideas to be dangerous, but not enough to leave fingerprints. But she paid in another way. I revised my will the following Monday. I didn't scream. I didn't even explain. I simply walked into Eliza's office with a new plan, one drawn not out of revenge, but out of clarity. Elaine was removed as a beneficiary entirely. Instead, I sat with Eliza for nearly 3 hours, crafting a legacy that mattered, that breathed. Mira was the first name I wrote down. I remembered the crack in her voice when she spoke to me from the shadows of her own trauma. I remembered how quickly she handed over years of evidence not for her own benefit, but to stop another woman from suffering the same fate. I wanted that strength to multiply. I established a fund in her name, Mira's Haven, a center to help women, especially older ones, who'd been emotionally manipulated, financially controlled, or socially isolated by those closest to them. It would offer legal guidance, temporary housing, and most importantly, a place to be heard and believed. Then came the second portion. For years, I had lived inside the machinery of media, where younger faces often replaced wiser ones, and where the quiet brilliance of older women dimmed under studio lights that favored youth. I remembered the women who'd left journalism after raising children, only to find the doors of the newsroom closed when they tried to return. So I created the Langston Fellowship, a scholarship for women over 45 returning to media, journalism, or communications after personal hiatuses. The requirement was simple. They had to have something to say and the courage to say it no matter how long it had been. The third portion of my estate I left untouched, for now. Not because I didn't know where it should go, but because I wanted to take my time. For once, I was in no rush. The idea of rushing no longer held its old urgency. My worth no longer lived in momentum. It lived in meaning. I left Eliza's office that afternoon with the papers signed, sealed, and stored safely. There was no tremble in my hand, no second thoughts, only a quiet certainty that felt more like breath than victory. At home, the walls seemed different, not emptier, but freer. Like the house had exhaled too. Evan never called again. Elaine sent one short message. Noted. That was all. But I didn't need apologies. I didn't even need understanding. What I needed was what I'd found, the right to rebuild on my terms, the strength to reclaim space not just in my home, but in my own narrative. The woman who once built stories for others had finally written one for herself. And it was quiet, yes, but unshakable. In the weeks that followed, I began volunteering quietly at Mira's center. I didn't give my name. I just listened. I sat beside women I'd never met, but understood in ways deeper than words. I helped them fill out forms. I made tea. I sat in silences long enough for pain to find language, and every once in a while I would pass the window and catch my own reflection. Older, wiser, a little worn, but entirely whole. Not everyone who loses love loses their power. Some of us find it there. I never intended to write it all down. Some stories live better in silence, tucked beneath routines and tea-stained mornings. But something changed when I sat beside the garden window that March morning, the air soft with spring and memory, and found myself opening an old notebook. The words came slowly at first, not angry, not bitter, just quiet, like they had waited for their moment. I didn't write it as a confession or a warning. I wrote it as a reckoning, not with them, but with myself. I didn't use my name. The blog wasn't public. It had no following. Just a few scattered entries under a pseudonym I chose on instinct, Margot Reeves. A name that had no history, no weight, just room. The first post was simple. I wrote, "Sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come with slamming doors or screaming voices. It arrives with soft hands and a smile that says, 'Trust me.' And you do." Until one day, I didn't know if anyone would read it, but writing it made something shift inside. Not closure exactly, something quieter, like settling dust. Weeks passed. I spent time at Mira's center, helped draft some early training materials, sorted through files, sometimes just sat in the back room folding brochures. One Tuesday morning, as I organized a shelf of donated books, Mira walked in holding her phone with both hands, her eyes brighter than I'd ever seen. "She got in," she whispered. I didn't need to ask who. Emmy, her niece, not by blood, but by the kind of bond that lasts longer, had been accepted to university. First-generation college student, full scholarship, communications major. "She wants to be a journalist," Mira said, her voice breaking just slightly. "She said she wants to tell stories that matter." That protect, I smiled, but something inside me cracked wide open, not from sadness, from a kind of fierce, aching hope. Later that night, Emmy sent a message to the anonymous blog. She wrote, "I don't know who you are, but your story reminded me why silence is never neutral. It either protects the truth or buries it. Thank you for choosing the first." I stared at those lines for a long time. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. There are victories that don't look like medals or headlines. Sometimes they arrive in unread blog posts, in scholarships bearing names no one remembers, in young women walking into classrooms their mothers were never allowed to dream of. I've come to understand something simple, something I wish I'd known earlier. You don't always have to win in the way the world defines it. You don't have to reclaim every dollar, restore every relationship, or prove every accusation. Sometimes, all you have to do is stay standing. Speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. Build one quiet thing that cannot be undone. That morning, I closed the notebook. The garden outside had started to bloom again, like it always did. The world didn't change, Not all at once, but something had, and I had too.